Today's episode is sponsored by Audible. For a free audio trial, check out audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer. The Lutheran Cartographer, Episode 5. Welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer. Today we are joined by Pastor DeGroot. Pastor DeGroot is in New Mexico. Pastor DeGroot, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and how you ended up in New Mexico?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a missionary pastor. I've been a missionary pastor for about 5 years. I was ordained in 2010 and served at an actual parish for about 4 years. So have a little bit of experience in both of those. I'm married to a deaconess, Melissa DeGroot, and she is originally from Rhode Island. I'm originally from South Dakota, the western side, the good side, right? Became a Lutheran as an adult convert back in 2006, 2007, and then quickly was sort of swallowed up with the bad crowd and ended up at the seminary not too long after that. We have got one little boy is in third grade, and we're living currently in New Mexico, serving St. Andrew Lutheran Church.
Wonderful. Tell me a little bit more about New Mexico. What are some of the good things about being there, and how would you contrast it with some of the other places you've been before, like South Dakota?
New Mexico, it's a wonderful place. It's actually, we didn't know this until just recently. It's the fifth largest state in terms of land mass, but I think somewhere around 38th in terms of total population density. So for a kid from South Dakota, that's sort of warms the cockles of my heart to know that, you know, there's people here, but there's still plenty of space to be able to get lost in. And so we served up in Rochester, New York, for 4 years. That was my first call, and then immediately after that in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So when we were in Rochester, just to kind of give you just a stark contrast of the weather, it was 260 days of rain and overcast weather, not too different than Washington, actually a little bit more rain. But then we moved to Philadelphia and found that, you know, as the show on Netflix says, it is always sunny in Philadelphia. So that was good, and had a good chance to be actually in the inner city of Philadelphia doing work at a mission congregation there for 3 years. So in terms of what you see here in Albuquerque, it's actually the 30th largest city in the nation, which not a lot of people maybe know. So there's about 526,000 people in the city itself and about 1 million in the metro area of the city of Albuquerque. But then it's not very difficult in about a half hour to 45 minutes to be really literally in the middle of nowhere, either in the mountains or in the middle of the desert, which can be good or bad, right? You don't want to find yourself alone in the middle of the desert for all the wrong reasons, if you've ever watched Breaking Bad. Which ironically was filmed here in Albuquerque. So it's a good large city, mid-sized, I say, with a lot of opportunities for things both in the city and outside of the city.
Okay. So in addition to the question of weather, how else would you contrast New Mexico when it comes to other places you've lived, especially around what it's like being a Lutheran there?
Sure. The places that I've served all the way back to my vicarage, which was back in 2008, that was in North Carolina. And then my first call, of course, Rochester, Philadelphia, and then down here. We're kind of have been on the fringes of where you would expect Lutherans to be. Stereotypically, Lutherans are Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and those sorts of places like that. So what we're finding here in Albuquerque especially is that there's, and really actually in all the places we've lived, is there's been a fairly large number of Roman Catholics, especially on the East Coast. And then as we've come down here to New Mexico, what we found is very few Lutherans actually in the city of Albuquerque. If I were to roughly estimate, I'd say there's maybe 800 to 1,000 Lutherans in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. But then comparing and contrasting that to individuals specifically in the neighborhood that we live in, which is predominantly Spanish heritage and a Latino mix of individuals from Central and South America, but also a good smattering of individuals, Navajo, Native Americans, Pueblo as well. We're finding here that at least the mention of us being a Lutheran often draws the question, are Lutherans Christian?
Interesting.
And so And I find that doesn't necessarily have a whole lot to do because specifically with Roman Catholics, I find that doesn't have much to do with the fact that they've been told that Martin Luther was excommunicated as a heretic. But probably more closely is related to the fact that what they've always historically known is either Roman Catholicism or some form of evangelicalism. So it's a good challenge.
So tell me a little bit more about what you like about New Mexico. What are some of the good things about the area? You mentioned the opportunities in being around the 30th biggest city in the nation. What are some of the other good things about being in New Mexico?
Sure. Yeah, it's the circuit, and then the LCMS. Oftentimes, the group of pastors in a specific area, city, would be called it's a circuit of churches, and so the circuit, by and large, is a very good circuit with pastors who understand sort of what it's like to be a Lutheran in an area that has not historically been so. So in terms of the people specifically that we deal with, sort of in a professional manner, we find that we kind of are sort of a tight-knit group that sticks together. And that's not, I guess, to be understood as to say we're exclusive, but it is important to understand that it is a very tight group of people that is able to, I think, very clearly and articulately proclaim the faith that has been given to us. And so that's good in terms of the persons. Albuquerque is also, per capita, one of the largest number of PhDs in the nation. And that goes back to a lot of the days when the Department of Energy was developing the atomic bomb. And so we have a lot of individuals that have been left over from that. So there's a good opportunity to meet a lot of professionals that are working in very secure jobs. But there's also opportunities, too, to work with a number of people that are underchurched, underemployed, and are hungry for the gospel, which is good. And I find a lot of times, especially that lapsed Catholics or historical Catholics are receptive to both two things. I think the willingness of me to be able to speak with them, and the clarity with which I confess the faith. So those are really with regard to the people. And then around the area, it's desert climate, but we have accessibility to the snow. So there's skiing and sledding, which is fun. Hiking, camping, hunting, fishing, all those things are around here. And, you have a good variation of a number of different things within about 2 hours that both as a local and even as a visitor, you can participate in. And actually, right now, that began on Saturday, the International Balloon Fiesta has been going on, which is quite amazing to see close to 600 hot air balloons all ascending at the same time. So a lot of vibrant things that are going on, but also a very rich history here that goes back to Coronado, the Spanish explorer. A lot of that culture and that history remains. I like to say often that, a lot of things have changed in Albuquerque and New Mexico since 1520, but there are a lot of things that haven't. So it's a good place to sort of be around individuals that in a lot of ways have a good mooring in what the family is, but also a tremendous amount of care for the individuals that are around them.
For the layperson, it sounds like you'd really highlight those who's interested in moving to or even visiting New Mexico. You'd really highlight the outdoor opportunities, the mooring to history and to culture, and the opportunities that come with that highly educated population that you were talking about. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, no, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Absolutely. Yeah, I think you hit it right on the nail, right on the head.
Okay. Let's turn to the other side. What are some things that aren't so good about New Mexico?
Sure. Yeah, it's I think the thing that is very prominent, and I think anybody, the most common Google search actually pertains to this as it relates to Albuquerque. The most common question actually asked is, how is the crime in Albuquerque? And unfortunately, it's a city you'd like to lead the nation in lots of things, but unfortunately, Albuquerque does lead the country in crime per capita. with that being the case, there's also distinctions of that too. Unfortunately, it's violent crime that often pertains to the drugs that are coming from Mexico, but also individuals and human trafficking is something that we have to be aware of down here in New Mexico. So it's not something that you can't avoid, but it is definitely something that you have to be aware of.
Okay. What else?
Yeah, it's I can't. I mean, other than that, I think just kind of hearkening back to the one of the first questions is that coming from the East Coast, what I've realized is that the pace here is very slow, and that's good in a lot of ways, because I think New Mexico, Albuquerque in particular, really allows for a person to sort of settle in to what is it's still an industrious pace, but it certainly is not anything that you would find, I think, on the coasts, where individuals maybe would be a little bit more driven by success and whatnot. So it's not to say, like I said, that that's a bad thing for the individuals here. I think they have a pretty good understanding of what leisure is and how to enjoy leisure time. So it's kind of a two-edged sword a little bit there. Maybe if you're coming from the coast, it's a little bit more difficult to get adjusted to, but I think as you're here longer, it kind of grows on you a little bit.
So that opportunity to take a breath and not rush around as much.
Yeah, well, and the term that they use for kind of how life goes here in New Mexico is we're on mañana time, and that's okay, but it's one of those things that you sort of get used to. Maybe things don't start on time, as a little bit of a history up in the upper Midwest, and good Germans and good Dutch people like to start early, if not on time, and so
certainly, why put off to tomorrow what you can do today, right?
Right. Well, we're learning very slowly that that there are individuals who are and do put things off till tomorrow, and sometimes that can be good.
So earlier you mentioned your family. I want to go back to that.
Sure.
Tell me what it's like to raise a family in Albuquerque.
Yeah, well, it's sort of two things. Sort of the bad things, the schools, unfortunately, are maybe not the best public schools. However, there are a tremendous amount of parochial schools that are available that are of a very high reputation in Albuquerque. So in terms of the schools, there are certain districts where I think you could find good schools. In terms of opportunities for families to do things within the city, there's a fair amount of things to do that I think you could expect with a mid-sized city. And then in terms of sort of the interaction of individuals within the city, they're pretty good at being able to, or it's pretty easy, rather, I guess to say, to find opportunities to go and to meet with people from other neighborhoods and other parts of the city. So, and then in terms of being able to find work, there are plenty of opportunities for especially highly skilled individuals. Those who are coming specifically, I think, in the areas of physics, mathematics, aerospace, engineering, those sorts of things like that. Albuquerque is a very good place, and the ability to find a job it's readily available. And then in terms of other sort of mid-range jobs, there are a number of places that are always hiring. So the ability to make a living is pretty good. And then the other thing that kind of goes along with that is kind of a downfall is Albuquerque is a fairly large city in terms of its actual area. And a lot of those opportunities are in different parts of the city. And what we've had to learn is that, coming from the East Coast, where almost everything that you'd ever want was within 10 minutes, and anything that wasn't within 10 minutes wasn't worth going to, we've had to quickly put that to bed and realize that, if we want our son to be in the school that he's in, we have to drive about 30 minutes across town to be able to do that. So you just kind of bite the bullet and do that. So it is a good place, slow, a bit of a slow pace, with a lot of families, that a good smattering of individuals that are coming in for professional jobs, but also a number of families that have a very long history here in Albuquerque. As a matter of fact, there are people that I've met that have not just a heritage, but own land that was originally granted to them back in the original land grants that were in New Mexico. So it's pretty amazing to see the mix of transient people, but also the number of people that have been here for a number of generations.
Yeah, and then that ties back in with your mention of history as that kind of rootedness, right?
Yeah, it's really kind of fascinating in the sense that those individuals we've met that have those ties, they are not Latino, they are Spanish. And you have to be very conscious of that. And then as history's kind of gone forward, individuals that have come from other Latin American countries are sort of considered to be Mexican and outsiders. So there's a certain amount of pride that people have in having that historical tie back to the middle 1600s. So it's good. I think it's, I've likened it in a lot of ways. There are prominent families here in Albuquerque that have been here for hundreds of years, much the same as there are prominent families on the East Coast. And what's been really sort of surprising to me is to realize that the history of New Mexico goes farther back even than colonial America. So being able to have a good understanding and appreciation for that, if nothing more, has allowed me to, I think, be able to start to ask good questions and to be able to interact with people on a more regular basis.
Okay. So it sounds like from what you've said that for those that are considering a move to New Mexico that have a family right now, they should really think about where the education will come from, because as you said, it sounds like the public schools might not be the best and some intentionality is needed in that area.
Yeah, definitely. And, there are certain areas of the city that would probably be able to provide an adequate, if not a good education. But the other thing, too, is thinking about it as well is that, especially if you're Lutheran and moving to this area, or I think any area, one of the things that I often will tell, in the old days when we had college students, one of the first things that I would tell them to do and to look for is a church. To be able to find a church and to find a neighborhood and a school that you're very comfortable with.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsor. If you're listening to this podcast on your device, you already know the power of having audio on the go. And Audible wants to put the books that you would love to listen to right into your ears with a free 30-day trial of their service. You can check out a wide variety of audiobooks, and if you'd like a suggestion, you can get Martin Luther's Table Talk, 7 hours of the wit and wisdom of Martin Luther on your device for free, but there are a wide variety of options to choose from if you'd rather not listen to Table Talk. So go to audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer to start your free 30-day trial today. So let's transition into one of the more fun topics, and that's your opportunity to tell our listeners that are thinking about visiting or even moving there, kind of what are some of the hidden gems, kind of the neat places to eat or things to do that are things that you think that anybody that's considering moving or even just visiting there see or do.
Yeah, sure. No, it's great. And there are a lot of hidden treasures. The historic Route 66 runs through Albuquerque. And along that swath there that runs east and west through Albuquerque on Central Avenue, you're going to find any number of places that had significant prominence back in the 50s and 60s. And one of the restaurants I just actually ate there today is it's called Frontier Restaurant, and they're known for pretty much they're varying New Mexican food, which is different than Mexican food. But their pork in red chili is very well known. And it's a restaurant that stays open 20 hours a day, which is fun. You get a pretty good mix of people that are sort of mashing there all together. And then as you're going out, White Sands is a very interesting place in the sense that, as you drive through, it's right there in the middle of the desert, but it looks like you're driving through 40-foot high snowdrifts. And you have the opportunity to be able to go and we can actually sled on the sand, which is pretty fun.
Really?
Yeah, so that's something. And then Carlsbad Caverns, that's a little bit more of a stretch. That's about 5 hours to the south. Santa Fe, both historically and I think in terms of its arts, is well known. And actually, the statistic I just recently heard is that Santa Fe has more art galleries per square mile than New York City does. So that's something maybe that people don't know. But then Albuquerque is a small little town near Santa Fe. Was made famous by the artist George O'Keeffe. Painted a lot of landscapes out there. So it's a kind of an interesting place that artists have met and have had second homes or have lived here. And the hidden gems is sort of fun. I could, like you said, I mean, I could jog my mind and my thoughts and realize that, yeah, I could probably talk for quite a bit longer on those things. But that's kind of the initial salvo of what there is around here.
Now as we start kind of looking to close out the podcast, would you please take a moment to talk to our listeners about what your advice would be to them if they're thinking about moving to New Mexico? You've already mentioned making sure to find a good church. Maybe start with that, and then any other thoughts that you would have for our listeners who are thinking about New Mexico.
Yeah, well, check the churches and get in contact with those pastors. Let them know what your intention is. And certainly, I think after making that contact with them, asking them any questions as they would pertain to availability of work, individuals within the church that might be able to get you connected to these things. And it's one of those things that's so great is that, as Lutherans and as people in the church, it's sort of a ready-made community that's there for you. And ask the questions about the schools and what might be available. The other thing that's really kind of wonderful too is that the real estate market in Albuquerque is very reasonable, and it's a very stark contrast to what we were accustomed to on the East Coast. I guess the best way to put it is you can get a lot of house for a little money. With that, also understanding too that being conscious of doing a little bit of homework. There are statistics available through the Bernalillo County Sheriff and the Albuquerque Police that kind of details, okay, this is an area of the city that maybe is a little bit more known for its crime. And that was one of the things that we actually did when we moved here, is to say, okay, we're going to try to move into this little pocket here. And by the grace of God, and I think just having good neighbors around, our neighborhood has largely remained pretty quiet in the greater swell of things that are happening around us. So, but I think that said, the main emphasis is that, especially for Lutherans, find a good church, a pastor that will be willing to shepherd you, at least from the beginning. And ultimately, yes, of course, through the time that you're here. And then just simply make yourself available to ask questions, but also to receive the answers in the direction from the folks that have been here for a while.
I want to jump back for just a moment. Tell me about what district you're in and kind of orient us and where New Mexico fits in the greater LCMS.
Sure. Yeah. So New Mexico is part of the Rocky Mountain District. Their headquarters is up in near Boulder, Colorado. And the Rocky Mountain District is comprised of New Mexico, Arizona, parts of Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. And in terms of the congregations we have in New Mexico, I'm kind of ballparking this. I think we maybe have 65 congregations in the state, and that may be a high estimate. And then the district as a whole has, I believe, 225 congregations in it. So it's a pretty good split that's proportional through all the different four parts of the district.
I see. Would you mind taking a few minutes and telling our listeners a little bit about your ministry? As you mentioned that you're in a missionary congregation. What is that? And tell us a little bit about your ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. So St. Andrew began as a church plant back 4 years ago, so in 2015. And it was a mission endeavor. I think it was a church that was started by the smallest church in Albuquerque. It was a church of about 50 people that then started this church in an area that's south of I-40 and west of I-25 that has historically not ever had a Lutheran church. So they planted it and held regular divine services at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that was just simply to accommodate the visiting pastor who had morning services. And so they maintained that, and then we were called back in 2017 and then arrived in 2018, and our work has really been to maintain what was started, but then being here full time and being able to devote a full-time ministry, beginning to talk with people in the neighborhood, getting to know them, talk to them about what we do, who Lutherans are, what we believe. And then some of the things that I've done, because the church is fairly small at this time, it's about 27 people, is cold calls to the hospitals, which is becoming harder to do because there's actually places in the hospital where they won't let me go. Even though I have this, it's pretty funny. Things have changed quite a bit. But cold calls to the hospital, and then regular attendance at a local nursing home on Mondays. I've done some applied and been accepted to do work in the prison, which is about 8 miles to the west of the church. And that was done simply because, of course, the crime being as high as it is and the high incarceration rate, it was, I think, by my initial analysis, important to begin to make the connection with these individuals that had been incarcerated, because hopefully and ultimately they'll be released and have a place that they can come to. And then some of the other things that we're doing in order to sort of bridge the gap and let people know we're here is, I've been asked enough questions by individuals for me to believe that there's some interest. And so what we've done then is started to we put together scripts for 40 90-second videos, basically answering a number of questions that will be recorded, and then those will be placed onto the website. And then what we do is that part of our canvassing through the neighborhoods, we'll disseminate that information to people. And what I've realized is, it's not a matter of it's not shoving it down people's throats, but making it available to them so that they can consult it in their good time. And I think that's important because there's a lot of folks here that sort of defecting, so to speak, from the Roman Catholic faith can, and I have seen, causes great dissension within families. And of course, as Lutherans, that's not what our intention is. Our intention simply is to let people know that grace is a free gift of God, that the mercy of God is there for all sinners, and that the gifts of God are given freely with absolutely no strings attached within the Lutheran Church. And the wonderful thing about that is for people to know there's one right around the corner. And so it's a good challenge. It's a challenge that I think that I certainly request prayers from individuals that are thinking of us here in Albuquerque. And Lord willing, we'll be able to continue to remain faithful to the confessions and minister to the people who are here. So it's a good place to be. It's wonderful.
Excellent. I would encourage all our listeners, if you're interested in supporting Pastor DeGroot's work, to go to lcms.org/DeGroot. Are there any other resources or places people can follow you that you would want to point people to?
Yeah, there is a link on Facebook, and I don't have that readily available at this particular time. I'm not sure if there's availability for links that I could maybe send at another time.
Yeah, I'll be putting all this on our show notes page. It'll be lutherancartographer.com/5, and any resources you want to send me, the link to the LCMS page that I mentioned will be there, and any links that you'd like to send me, Pastor DeGroot, I'll happily put there for you.
Wonderful. I really appreciate it. It's a blessing.
Absolutely. Any parting thoughts for our listeners?
Well, if you're thinking about relocating or just coming to visit, certainly look us up. We'd love to see you. Like I said, talk to a pastor before you come. And we're certainly receptive to having folks here. And if you do come, we'd love to be able to show you around Albuquerque.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for your time today, Pastor DeGroot. God's peace to you.
And God's peace to you as well. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. If you're listening to this on release day, the 31st of December, I would encourage you to consider giving a year-end gift to Pastor DeGroot and his ministry. You can do that at lcms.org/DeGroot. And if it's already 2020 by the time you're listening to this, a Happy New Year, and you can get an early start on your giving as well. Again, I want to encourage you to check out the free Audible offer at audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer. And if you want any information or any of the links that we discussed today, you can go to LutheranCartographer/5 for the show notes. I'm Nicholas Weber. Talk to you soon.